As wireless carriers are moving beyond cellular connectivity, industry is innovating beyond traditional technologies that to support IoT and emerging verticals. Here at Mobile World Congress 2017, we have the pleasure of speaking with influencers in the connectivity space. At the end of this panel is Brent Hodges. He's the head of IoT planning and product strategy at Dell EMC. Next to Brent is Bill Morelli. He's senior research director for enterprise and IT at IHS. And next to me is Mo Nasser. He's general manager of the IoT business unit that at Sprint. And gentlemen, welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So the title of this panel is Wireless Carriers Moving Beyond Connectivity. Brent, I want to start with you. Why would you say cellular likely will not be the primary network to really connect billions of IoT devices?
Well, I think it comes down to the use cases, and where we're focused on the Internet of Things is, of course, in the commercial and enterprise space. So I'm not talking about consumer devices, but in the enterprise, what we see is that there's a combination of connectivity technologies that are required. Again, cellular is really great for mobility. It's there for remote access. You can get access almost anywhere. But for a lot of applications, you have Wi-Fi or Ethernet or other technologies that are available. And for us, we're providing IoT infrastructure. We need to support those different connectivity options for our customers so that they can build their applications in the environments that they have. But make no mistake, cellular is an important component in the Internet of Things, very much a valuable thing. So it's something we're very invested in.
Mel, I'd imagine as a carrier you would have a perspective on this.
Just a little bit. So it is very true that cellular will actually be probably about 20% of the total number of IoT devices, and that's mainly because not all IoT applications need the full macro, network. There will be pockets here and there, and also has to do with economics. The modules that you have to put in for cellular are a little bit more expensive than the low power, but what's happened is that the bifurcation of the standard has now created a new standard just for IoT called NB-IoT that allows you to actually take that number of the price for the modules down, and it'll get a little bit higher than maybe 20%, but it's so large that they will be more than cellular for sure.
So you don't see insurmountable challenges in this space as there are other options besides cellular?
No, because even the carriers are now going beyond cellular. So it's not something that we see it as competition. It's just that we have to grow with what the industry is demanding.
I think that's a pretty key point, and that we are seeing a lot of carriers do that. There's a lot of tools in the toolbox. IoT, when you start talking about tens of billions of devices and really an almost infinite number of use cases, cellular is a perfect fit for a lot of those use cases. But then you have to start pushing into some of the other ones where, because of cost or because of context, maybe it's more of a fixed application, cellular may not make as much sense as the direct point of contact, or as Mo pointed out, it may serve a valuable function as an aggregator for a number of different IoT endpoints, and that then becomes the backhaul to the core network.
Bernard, I want to ask you about how Dell EMC and really industry at large is reacting to the low power, short range connectivity technologies, LoRa, Ingenue, and so forth. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's a continuation of the first question. As Bill and Mo both said, there's a range of technologies, coming to bear. There's NB-IoT and kind of in the license spectrum you see developments there, but we also see these kind of other technologies that are cropping up from LoRa, Sigfox, Ingenue, and others that, again, kind of fit certain use cases very well, especially where there's low power sensors with not a lot of data to send. There's a great fit there for those kinds of environments. Again, maybe the cost of the sensors need to be super cheap and inexpensive, and the data is not very frequent or doesn't change very often. So in those environments, you can easily envision some of these other low power technologies, kind of taking shape. And then, I think the jury's out 3, 4, or 5 years from now once you have more of the standardization around NB-IoT and the like, the narrow band and lower power technologies that are coming in the standards organizations. We'll see where they all shake out. I mean, it's wireless horses for courses, and so you may see the proliferation over time, and then maybe some pullback as more of the established business models take shape.
I think really what the entrance of low power wide area networks has done in terms of the mobile ecosystem is really helped accelerate development and driven this kind of bifurcation for cellular technologies. Historically, for M2M, or what we're now calling IoT use cases, what we've seen is just older generations of cellular technologies that were generally less expensive being used for those applications, but quite frankly, that was overkill for a lot of those applications. What we're seeing now with LTE-M and now NB-IoT is standards development being worked on for modules and chipsets that are specifically designed for these kinds of IoT applications where it can be very power efficient and cost efficient.
The only other thing that I would caution is that the macro cellular network was built very efficiently to be, safe and secure, and with SLAs basically. If you go to other lower power networks, they have to actually get to that standard. So that's the only part that you have to, when you're deploying, make sure that those low power area networks can deliver on security and also on latency and SLAs.
Well, I want to stick with you. With the stage set the way it has and the title of this panel, how are carriers adjusting in order to really monetize IoT and create that business case, that value?
Yeah, great question, because if we just continue on selling connectivity, we'll be a dumb pipe, and that is not what the carriers want to do. They want to really move up the chain, which means looking at where the value of a whole solution lies is in the application and even in the application enablement. So you will see a lot of the carriers now just moving from connectivity to building the apps, to selling the apps, and really making much more revenue out of what they have. Otherwise, they'll be selling commodity, so they're going to be moving away from commodity play into real revenue generation.
Brian, I want to stay on IoT and talk about really maybe the human resource or workforce implications of the Internet of Things. From your perspective at Dell EMC, what are you seeing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because this past 6 months or so we've started to see an emerging trend that has reminded us of IoT and kind of its place. And what I'd say is it's starting to show some signs of maturity and getting into beyond the POCs, if you will, the pilot, the proof of concepts. And what we're seeing is that it requires the integration of different parts of the organization. So while we're talking about the technology parts of this, I think while there's some varied views and there's lots of choices, the technology part of this is the easier part. I think the organizational changes required to take advantage of these new forms of data coming in, new business models being enabled. I think that's the workplace challenge, the organizational challenge that we're starting to see and talk to some of our customers about. And I think that's, as we see things mature, it's a good conversation to be having, and that's the one that will maybe take a little bit longer to settle out. As new departments come into being, you have new kind of job titles being created, and as people are integrating that pools of data into new functions and new business services, you've got to take that into account. Even how you do accounting and finance, we're seeing some changes, as well as other industries like insurance that a lot of people don't maybe necessarily think of top of mind for IoT, but that are undergoing some radical changes just because you've got more sensors, more data, and now new things to do, but it requires an organization change as well to take advantage of those benefits.
And really new types of roles within the organization. I mean, we're not gathering 1/10 of the data we potentially will be with IoT when it really comes to fruition. And that's going to create all kinds of new opportunities, not just for collecting that data and analyzing that data, but IoT is not happening in a vacuum. There's all sorts of other development happening around that. If you look at what we're seeing today with drones as they start to move into commercial drones, you look at what we're seeing in the roadmap for autonomous vehicles, and you start thinking about areas, for example, like transportation and logistics, you're now going to have a whole crop of, you may not have the delivery driver function in the same way it was in years past, but you are now going to have people who need to manage that fleet of drones and that fleet of vehicles and be programming for them and doing repair work on them. And there's going to be a whole different technical skill set and a set of jobs that are created out of that.
Well, I want to ask you about, again, from a carrier perspective, and sticking with IoT for now, what are some of the solutions or applications that are really becoming the most valuable for IoT?
So traditionally, transportation is really an area that has what I would consider to be mature within IoT today. Everything on wheels, whether it's asset management, fleet management, those are areas that have been probably going on for about 15 to 18 years. So we're seeing them now come into fruition, and the maturity level is hitting probably about 20 to 30% penetration. And other areas are in the areas of retail. So the retailers have started to actually take advantage of IoT, and we're seeing more than 60% take rate of retail, whether it's wireless WAN backup or digital signage or asset management. All of these things are becoming. Insurance is very interesting because it started out with UBI, just usage-based insurance, but now it's going beyond that because insurance figured out that this data is very, very lucrative and has a lot of potential. So now you're seeing bigger models that are taking place and connecting the insurance companies directly with the consumers.
Bert, I want to go back to really moving beyond cellular connectivity or a cellular network. Industrial IoT, what kind of network would support industrial IoT?
Some of what Mo was just talking about, I like the insurance example, and I'll come to industrial in a second, but from an insurance standpoint, it goes back to that organizational change that I was mentioning, that they figured out very quickly that they can write better insurance policies if they've got this data and these connected drivers. I think what you're seeing in a manufacturing context, which is a big area for Dell, is you're seeing things like predictive maintenance and real-time quality control and other kind of machine applications which have existed in islands of automation, now being connected in new ways which allow for collecting data, analyzing at the edge, bringing back useful information that now can be further analyzed with machine learning across multiple lines and multiple plants, and now then algorithms updated so that the machine tomorrow can operate differently, whether you're talking about brewing beer or a process industry or in a line manufacturing example, learning something about the process, and not just on a particular machine, but across multiple machines and multiple factories. That's a big value to the industrial users that we see. So those are some of the examples where I think you're starting to learn new behaviors, and you're starting to see organizations realize the value of the data that they're capturing and what they can do with that.
I think that's why you see such strong interest in industrial still, because you can really articulate the value proposition for industrial IoT much better than you can in some of the consumer segments and some of the consumer markets, where it's really about convenience for the consumer, which is nice, but it doesn't have the same appeal when you start talking about ROI for some of the industrial applications. And here's how we can help you improve your business. Here's a tangible impact we can make on your margins. And that's what industrial IoT really offers. In terms of connectivity technologies, I definitely think it's going to be a range, again, of technologies. Fixed is always going to play a critical role in an industrial environment, but what we're seeing is around the edges of that, it's not just about the plants in the factory, it's also about the replacement parts for that, and whether that's being communicated to over a cellular connection, and it's going to a 3D printer, and the replacement part is being manufactured, and you're scheduling downtime for that piece of equipment because of the predictive maintenance algorithms, and you can schedule that, bring your line down in an orderly fashion. That can be a tremendous value add for a process manufacturing organization.
Well, I want to finish by asking you what we haven't talked about as far as access to technologies that are encouraging traditional carriers to move beyond cellular. Anything we should be looking out for in the future? And if you could all chime in on this one as well.
Brent mentioned LoRa technologies, right? Low power. There's companies that are popping up that have really solid solutions. There's standard-based solutions and non-standard. So, technologies like Wi-Sun, for example, is standard-based, and it has nice SLAs with it. So we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space, quite a bit of innovation. And the funny part is that it's going to be some of it, like I said, standard, non-standard, and some on licensed versus non-licensed too. So it's the Wild West. It'll come to some sort of conclusion at some point, but right now it's really a major house for innovation.
I think we're seeing some of that in the roadmap for cellular technology as well, where they're looking at, even within the standards framework for licensed spectrum, being able to incorporate unlicensed as part of that solution. So there is a tremendous amount of innovation happening there, and kind of to echo a point that Mo made earlier, I think that's really where the cellular carriers are focusing their efforts and attention. One is moving beyond just traditional cellular and looking at if there's a unlicensed spectrum play for them, and then two is really looking at what their offering is for vertical markets. So can they do value-added services or even an end-to-end solution in some cases where they really increase the value to the end customer as opposed to just providing the connectivity piece of the solution.
Yeah, and I would also just build on that and say, for the connectivity technologies, as Mo's mentioned, several of these are, they're unlicensed. The SLAs aren't maybe what customers are used to, and I think where that comes into play is when customers move beyond the pilots and they start to get into actual deployments, and when they're using the example you gave of they're counting on their manufacturing line to orderly shut down at a certain time, where a part that's being 3D printed, I mean, all of a sudden the reliability of that whole set of transactions is now mission critical to your business. And I think there's a play there where service providers actually have built a business on providing service levels that companies are used to. What Internet of Things is bringing is lots of new experimentation, but as they try to bring that into the mainstream and as they want to run their business, that requires certainty, and certainty or uncertainty will not be tolerated. So therefore, they're going to come back to wanting actual, I want a SLA that I can rely on because my plant's relying on it, my customers are relying on it, and so right now we're seeing lots of the Wild West, and it's okay to have some of these maybe slightly more unpredictable technologies involved, but as people move closer to value, they're learning to count on that value to be delivered, and therefore they need connected services to really step up and make sure they're getting the value that they're counting on as they run their business differently in the future.
It's always good to have a carrier analyst and vendor on wireless carriers moving beyond cellular. So thank you all for being here. Brent, as always, thank you. Bill, done this a few times. So appreciate you giving us your time. And Mo, it's been a little while, but thanks for being here.
Thank
you held
you.
your ground, by the way. You did.
Appreciate it.
All right, thanks again. And to all our viewers out there, you can get all our TI Now content if you log on to tinow.org. So long.